What's up, guys? Welcome back. And today we are going over Chapter 4 from Maxwell Maltz Psycho-Cybernetics. This chapter is called Dehypnotize Yourself from False Beliefs. So here we go. My friend, Dr. Alfred Adler, there he is, Alfred Adler. I've mentioned this book, The Courage to be Disliked, which is all about Adlerian psychology many times. I created a video on it. The video is probably one of the hardest videos that I've made. I put the most time and effort going into it. I broke down all of the kind of aspects, the most important key takeaways from this line of psychology. And I used various different popular TV shows to illustrate these points. But regardless, back into this book. My dear friend Alfred Adler had an experience when a young boy, which illustrates just how powerfully belief can be upon behavior and ability. He got off to a bad start in arithmetic, and his teacher became convinced that he was dumb in mathematics. The teacher then advised his parents of this fact and told them not to expect too much of him. They too were convinced. Adler passively accepted the evaluation they placed upon him, and his grades in arithmetic proved they had been correct. One day, however, he had a sudden flash of insight and thought he saw how to work a problem the teacher had put on the board, and which none of the other pupils could work. He announced as much to the teacher. She and the whole class laughed, whereupon he became indignant, strode to the blackboard, and worked the problem much to their amazement. In doing so, he realized that he could understand arithmetic. He felt a new confidence in his ability, and he went on to become a good math student. This is just so illustrative of the point that in our early years, we pick up on people's things that they say, the adults in our environment, our peers in a classroom, could be siblings, parents, teachers, whatever, and we take these things as truths, and they're not true. They may, more than likely, they are more of a reflection on that person. Now that we're adults, we can look back and see, logically, these things aren't true, but they're still deep-rooted. And that's why doing belief work, I have that link down below you guys can do to find your limiting beliefs, uproot them by the root, and replace them with new positive beliefs that are going to serve you. And it's an amazing tool that I have down there. When I first discovered it, made a huge impact for me. But regardless, all these ideas go back hand in hand. So let's continue on. So Dr. Adler's experience was very much like that of a patient of mine some years back. It informs your self-concept, which informs your filtration system for which you view everything in your life. A businessman who wanted to excel in public speaking because he had a vital message to impart about outstanding success in a difficult field. He had a good voice on an important topic, but he was unable to get in front of strangers and put his message over. What held him back was his belief that he could not make a good talk and that he would fail to impress his audience simply because he did not have an imposing appearance. He did not look like a successful executive. This belief had burrowed so deeply in him that he threw a roadblock every time he stood up before a group of people and began to talk. He mistakenly concluded that if he could have an operation to improve his appearance, he would then gain the confidence needed. An operation might have done the trick, and it might not. My experience with other patients had shown physical change didn't always guarantee personality change. The solution for him was found when he became convinced that this negative belief was preventing him from delivering the vital information he had. He succeeded in replacing the negative belief with a positive belief that he had a message of extreme importance that he alone could deliver, no matter what he looked like. In due time, he was one of the most sought-after speakers in the business world. The only change was in his belief and in his self-image. Now, the point I want to make is this. Adler had been hypnotized by a false belief about himself, not figuratively, but literally and actually hypnotized. Remember that we said in the last chapter that the power of hypnosis is the power of belief. Let me repeat here Dr. Barber's explanation of the power of hypnosis. Before I read that, I just want to make this clear that any of these techniques, robotic affirming, you are hypnotizing yourself. All of the things that are said, guided meditations, that is a hypnosis. all of these teachers, Emile Coué being the most prominent father of autosuggestion, father of robotic affirming, he was a hypnotist. All of these guys that work on belief change, they work on identity level change. Tony Robbins, they've all studied NLP, they've all studied hypnosis, and we come in and out of these trance states all the time. That's why Neville's state akin to sleep is effective, is because you are in a trance hypnotic state, a state between where you are relaxed, where your subconscious is more receptive to the ideas that you are suggesting to it. Okay, so here's the quote. We found that hypnotic subjects are able to do surprising things only when convinced that the hypnotist's words are true statements. When the hypnotist has guided the subject to the point where he's convinced that they are true statements, the subject then behaves differently because he thinks and believes differently. The important thing for you to remember is that it does not matter in the least how you got the idea or where it came from. You may never have met a professional hypnotist. You may never have been formally hypnotized. But if you've accepted an idea from yourself, your teachers, your parents, your friends, advertisements, this is why media has had such a detrimental and profound impact on people, or from any other source. And further, if you are firmly convinced that idea is true, it has the same power over you as the hypnotist's words have over the hypnotized subject. And there's that quote again from Vladimir Lenin, that if you repeat something over and over again enough times, people will believe it was true. And he was talking about in culture in general and in propaganda. But this also goes for ourselves as well, and that is the power that we have with repetition and suggestion. Scientific research has shown that Dr. Adler's experiences was not 1 in a million, but typical of practically all students who make poor grades. In Chapter 1, we told how Prescott Leckie had brought about almost miraculous improvements in the grades of school children by showing them how to change their self-image. After thousands of experiments and many years of research, Leckie concluded that poor grades in school are, in almost every case, due in some degree to the student's self-conception and self-definition. These students had been literally hypnotized by such ideas as, I am dumb, I have a weak personality, I am poor in arithmetic, I am a naturally poor speller, I am ugly, I do not have a mathematical type mind, etc. With such self-definitions, the student had to make poor grades in order to be true to himself. Unconsciously, making poor grades became a moral issue with him. It would be as wrong from his own viewpoint for him to make good grades, and it would be to steal if he defines himself as an honest person. And this is, again, why with the commonality with all these, I'm dumb, poor at math, ugly, I have a weak personality, all these things, is I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough. And the other way of looking at that is this victim mentality. And that's why it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I've talked about this at length in other videos. I'm not going to go in depth with it right now because I've spoken about it before. But as you can see, when you begin to adopt these beliefs, you're filtering all of the evidence. Your brain is now, your RAS is tuned in and primed to look for that evidence. So if you believe, these people hurt me, and I'm always the receiver of injustice, and I've been mistreated, and your brain is going to find evidence for that to be true. If you look out at your reality and you say, I have power, I have the power to change my reality. Yeah, maybe this happened to me, but I have the ability to tell myself a different story. I have an ability to create a new reality for myself. I have an ability to rise above whatever circumstances that I ran into and create the life of my choosing, the life of my dreams. You're going to begin to tune in, and your RAS is going to tune in to those opportunities in your reality. Okay, the case of the hypnotized salesman. In the book, Secrets of Successful Selling, John D. Murphy tells how Elmer Wheeler used Leckie's theory to increase earnings of a certain salesman. Elmer Wheeler had been called in as a sales consultant to a certain firm. The sales manager called his attention to a very remarkable case. A certain salesman always managed to make almost exactly $5,000 per year, regardless of the territory they assigned him or the commission he was paid. Because this salesman had done well in a rather small territory, had been given a larger and much better one, but the next year his commission amounted to almost the same amount as that he had made in the smaller one, $5,000. The following year, the company increased the commission paid to all salesmen, but the salesman still managed to only make $5,000. He was then assigned to one of the company's poorest territories and again made the usual $5,000. Wheeler had a talk with this salesman and found that the trouble was not in the territory, but in the salesman's own evaluation of himself. He thought of himself as a $5,000 per year man, and as long as he held that concept of himself, outside conditions didn't seem to matter much. When he was assigned a poor territory, he worked hard to make that $5,000. When he was assigned a good territory, he found all sorts of excuses to coast when the $5,000 was in sight. Once, when the goal had been reached, he got sick and was unable to work any more that year, although doctors can find nothing wrong with him, and he miraculously recovered by the first of the next year. How a false belief aged a man 20 years. In a previous book, Maxwell Maltz Adventures in Staying Young, I gave a detailed case history of how Mr. Russell aged almost 20 years overnight because of a false idea, then regained his youth almost as quickly when he accepted the truth. Briefly, the story is this. I performed a cosmetic operation on Mr. Russell's lower lip for a very modest fee under the condition that he must tell his girlfriend that the operation had cost him his entire savings of a lifetime. His girlfriend had no objection to his spending money on her, and she insisted that she loved him, but explained that she could never marry him because of his too large lower lip. However, when he told her of this and proudly exhibited his new lower lip, her reaction was just as I expected, but not as Mr. Russell had anticipated. She became hysterically angry, called him a fool for having spent all his money, and advised him in no uncertain terms that she never loved him, never would, and that she'd merely played him for a sucker as long as he had money to spend on her. However, she went further than I counted on. In her anger and disgust, she also announced that she was placing a voodoo curse upon him. Both Mr. Russell and his girlfriend had been born on the island of the West Indies, where voodoo was practiced by the ignorant and superstitious. His family had been rather well-to-do. His background was one of culture, and he was a college graduate. Yet, when in the heat of anger his girlfriend cursed him, he felt vaguely uncomfortable, but did not think too much about it. However, he remembered and wondered when a short time later he felt a strange small bump on the inside of his lip. A friend who knew the voodoo curse insisted that he see Dr. Smith, who promptly assured him that the bump inside his mouth was the feared African bug, which would slowly eat away all his vitality and strength. Mr. Russell began to worry and look for signs of waning strength. He was not long in finding them. He lost his appetite and ability to sleep. I learned all this from Mr. Russell when he returned to my office several weeks after I dismissed him. My nurse didn't recognize him, and no wonder. The Mr. Russell who had first called upon me had been a very impressive individual, slightly too large lip and all. He stood about 6'4", a large man with his physique of an athlete and a bearing and manner that bespoke of an inner dignity and gave him a magnetic personality. The very pores of his skin seemed to exude an animal-like vitality. He had that animal magnetism that other spiritual teachers like Gurdjieff talks about. The Mr. Russell who now sat across the desk from me had aged at least 20 years. His hands shook with the tremor of age. His eyes and cheeks were sunken. He had lost perhaps 30 pounds, and the changes in his appearance were all characteristics of the process which medical science, for want of a better name, calls aging. After a quick examination of his mouth, I assured Mr. Russell I could get rid of the African bug in less than 30 minutes, which I did. The bump which had caused all the trouble was merely a small bit of scar tissue from his operation. I removed it, held it in my hand, and showed it to him. The important thing is he saw the truth and believed it. He gave a sigh of relief, and it seemed as if there was an almost immediate change in his posture and expression. Several weeks later, I received a nice letter from Mr. Russell, together with a photograph of him with his new bride. He had gone back to his home and married his childhood sweetheart. The man in the picture was the first Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell had grown young again, overnight. A false belief aged him 20 years. The truth had not only set him free of fear and restored his confidence, but had actually reversed the aging process. If you could have seen Mr. Russell as I did, both before and after, you would never again entertain any doubts about the power of belief, or that any idea accepted as true from any source can be every bit as powerful as hypnosis. Is everyone hypnotized? It is no exaggeration to say that every human being is hypnotized to some extent, either by ideas he has uncritically accepted from others, and that's what's so dangerous about the time that we live in right now, or ideas he has repeated to himself or convinced himself are true. These negative ideas have exactly the same effect upon our behavior as the negative ideas implanted into the mind of a hypnotized subject by a professional hypnotist. Have you ever seen a demonstration of an honest-to-goodness hypnosis? If not, let me describe to you just a few of the more simple phenomena which result from the hypnotist's suggestion. The hypnotist tells a football player that his hand is stuck to the table and that he cannot lift it. It is not a question of the football player not trying. He simply cannot. He strains and struggles until the muscles of his arm and shoulder stand out like cords. But his hand remains fully rooted to the table. He tells a championship weightlifter that he cannot lift a pencil from a desk. And although normally he can hoist a 400-pound weight overhead, he now actually cannot lift the pencil. Strangely enough, in the above instances, hypnosis does not weaken the athletes. They are potentially as strong as ever. Without realizing it consciously, they are working against themselves. On the one hand, they try to lift the hand or pencil by voluntary effort and actually contract the proper lifting muscles, but on the other hand, the idea that you cannot do it causes contrary muscles to contract quite apart from their will. The negative idea causes them to defeat themselves. They cannot express or bring into play their actual available strength. This idea of working against yourself is what I've discussed in recent videos too, where it goes, you can witness it in what he's talking about here physically. But when we're going for a goal, let's say that we have the affirmation that we want to be in a harmonious relationship, but we have this belief, this self-concept that says I'm no good at relationships. All my relationships are failures, or men are all scumbags, or women are all trash. Any of these contrary, conflicting beliefs that are deeply rooted in the subconscious makes it so that, even if they're about ourselves too, it could just be that, you want to tell yourself, I have the ability to attract this partner that I'm looking for, but you have that self-concept that says, and all your past history that says, hey, like, I'm not a confident person. I don't believe I'm an attractive person. It's now your energy is working against itself, and so that's why it cancels itself out. The gripping strength of a third athlete has been tested on a dynamometer that has been found to be 100 pounds. All his effort and straining cannot budge the needle beyond the 100-pound mark. Now he's hypnotized and told, you are very, very strong. Stronger than you've ever been in your life. Much, much stronger. You are surprised at how strong you are. Again, the gripping strength of his hand is tested. This time he easily pulls the needle to the 125-pound mark. Again, strangely enough, hypnosis has not added anything to his actual strength. What the hypnotic suggestion did was to overcome a negative idea which had previously prevented him from expressing his full strength. In other words, the athlete in his normal waking state had imposed a limitation upon his strength by the negative belief that he could only grip 100 pounds. The hypnotist merely removed this mental block and allowed him to express his true strength. The hypnosis literally dehypnotized him temporarily from his own self-limiting beliefs about himself. That's why you notice when you are able to achieve that thing that you've been thinking of, a lot of the time it flows pretty naturally. That's why you get the flow state, is because you're not working against yourself. Subconsciously, we have these patterns, these holding patterns almost exist within our body, like mentioned here, that's preventing us from actually expressing the embodied version of what it is that we're claiming into being. As Dr. Barber has said, it is awfully easy to assume that the hypnotist himself must have some magical power when you see rather miraculous things happening during a hypnotic session. The stutterer talks fluently. The timid, shy, retiring Casper Milquetoast becomes outgoing, poised, and makes a stirring speech. Another individual who is not especially good at adding figures with a pencil and paper when awake multiplies 2 3-digit figures in his head. All this happens apparently merely because the hypnotist tells them that they can and instructs them to go ahead and do it. To onlookers, the hypnotist's word has a magical power. Such, however, is not the case. The power, the basic ability to do these things, was inherent in the subjects all the time, even before they met the hypnotist. The subjects, however, were unable to use this power because they themselves did not know it was there. They had it bottled up, choked it off because of their own negative beliefs. Without realizing it, they had hypnotized themselves into believing they could not do these things. And it would be truer to say that the hypnotist had dehypnotized them to say that he had hypnotized them. So this next part is underlined here. Within you, whoever you may be, regardless of how big a failure you may think yourself to be, is the ability and the power to do whatever you need to do to be happy and successful. Within you right now is the power to do things you never dreamed possible. This power becomes available to you just as soon as you can change your beliefs, just as quickly as you can dehypnotize yourself from the ideas of, I can't, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve it, and other self-limiting ideas. Those are really foundational, fundamental limiting beliefs right there, and very, very common ones. When you get to the root belief that you can do in the exercise that I have down below, you can download that as a free ebook that shows you how to find your limiting beliefs and then uproot them by the roots. You can cure your inferiority complex. At least 95% of people have their lives blighted by feelings of inferiority to some extent. And to millions, this same feeling of inferiority is a serious handicap to success and happiness. In one sense of the word, every person on the face of the earth is inferior to some other person or persons. I know that I cannot lift as much weight as Paul Anderson, throw a 16-pound shot as far as Perry O'Brien, or dance as well as Arthur Murray. I know this, but it does not induce feelings of inferiority within me and blight my life, simply because I do not compare myself unfavorably with them and feel that I am no good merely because I cannot do certain things as skillfully or as well as they. I also know that in certain areas, every person I meet, from this newsboy on the corner to the president of the bank, is superior to me in certain aspects. But neither can any of these people repair a scarred face or do any number of other things as well as I. And I am sure that they do not feel inferior because of it. Feelings of inferiority originate not so much from facts or experiences, but our conclusions regarding facts and our evaluation of experiences. For example, the fact that I'm an inferior weightlifter and an inferior dancer, this does not, however, make me an inferior person. Paul Anderson and Arthur Murray's inability to perform surgery makes them inferior surgeons, but not inferior persons. It all depends upon what and whose norms we measure ourselves by. It is not knowledge of actual inferiority in skill or knowledge which gives us an inferiority complex and interferes with our living. It is the feeling of inferiority that does this. And this feeling of inferiority comes about for just one reason. We judge ourselves and measure ourselves not against our own norm or par, but against some other individual's norm. When we do this, we always, without exception, come out second best. But because we think and believe and assume that we should measure up to somebody else's norm, we feel miserable and second rate and conclude that there is something wrong with us. This is all underlined here. This is all, you can see my notes here just like going in on all of these important parts. The next logical conclusion in this cockeyed reasoning process is to conclude that we are not worthy, that we do not deserve success and happiness, and that it wouldn't be out of place for us to fully express our own abilities and talents, whatever they may be, without apology or without feeling guilty about it. All this comes about because we have allowed ourselves to be hypnotized by the entirely erroneous idea that I should be like so-and-so, or I should be like everybody else. The fallacy of the second idea can be readily seen through, if analyzed, for in truth, there are no fixed standards common to everybody else. Everybody else is composed of individuals, no two of whom are alike. It's a very important thing that he's saying right there, because that just shows the logical fallacy that we have in our thinking. We think, by comparing ourselves to everybody else, that there is this, that everybody else, like he said, it doesn't really exist. That's an idea that we've constructed in our mind. And, again, we could go back into reasoning why we do that. Tribalism, that's part of how our ancestors grew up, to categorize things and categorize and group and divide people into groups and stuff. But there's a logical fallacy in that. There really is a fallacy in that thinking. So the person with an inferiority complex invariably compounds their error by striving for superiority. His feelings spring from the false premise that he is inferior. From this false premise, a whole structure of logical thought and feeling is built. If he feels bad because he is inferior. The cure is to make himself as good as everybody else. And the way to really feel good about himself is to make himself superior. This is, observable with bullies and in adults with narcissism. Narcissism is this inflated, I'm going to make everybody else feel bad type of attitude so that I can make myself feel better. And this constantly, like constant one-upmanship or constant comparison that is just, it's not fun to be around people like that. And the people like that, they damage their relationships. And it's you can see through it. I mean, it's not something that is a sustainable way to engage with people and actually have healthy relationships. Nowadays, so much relationship advice is all this narcissistic, manipulative, toxic bullshit. And it may give get some results in a very short-term, short-sighted way. But again, it is not going to give you long-term sustainable results. The reason that you're getting in a relationship in the first place is to actually have a legitimate connection with somebody, to build something with somebody together. So by pitting yourselves against each other, you're never going to have that. It's never going to be conducive to any sort of real relationship, because the whole fundamental premise, the whole fundamental way that you're going about it is this combative nature. This striving for superior gets him into more trouble, causes more frustration, and sometimes brings about a neurosis where none existed before. He becomes more miserable than ever, and the harder he tries, the more miserable he becomes. And I've seen it in my own life. I've seen people like this, and they do not end up happy. They usually end up very alone. That's what I've observed in my personal life. Or even worse. Anyways, inferiority and superiority are reverse ideas of the same coin. The cure lies in realizing that the coin itself is spurious. The truth about you is this: you are not inferior, you are not superior, you simply are you. You as a personality are not in competition with any other personality, simply because there is not another personality on the face of the earth like you, or in your particular class. You are an individual, you are unique. This is exactly the language that Vadim Zeland uses also in Transurfing and in Tufty the Priestess, and it's true. You are not like any other person, and you never can become like any other person. You are not supposed to be like any other person, and no other person is supposed to be like you. Now, that's not to say that we don't want to strive to become the best version of ourselves, because there's always, and that it's a never-ending process to become better and to become, more present, better at communicating, better at just having more awareness around things and developing our mind, developing ourselves in every way that we can, and using self-development. But the message here being that you want to compete with yourself. You want to do better than you did yesterday. You don't want to constantly be looking outside of yourself, because your brain is going to just find all of these things every single time. Like he said, every person that you look at, there's going to be differences, disparities, and we're all created differently. God did not create a standard person and in some way label that person by saying, this is it. He made every human being individual and unique, just as he made every snowflake individual and unique. God created short people and tall people, large people, small people, skinny people, fat people, black, red, yellow, white people. He has never indicated any preference for any one size, shape, or color. Abraham Lincoln once said, God must have loved the common people, for he made so many of them. He was wrong. There is no common man, no standardized common pattern. He would have been nearer to the truth had he said, God must have loved uncommon people, for he made so many of them. An inferiority complex and its accompanying deterioration in performance can be made to order in the psychological laboratory. All you need to do is set up a norm or average, then convince your subject that he does not measure up. A psychologist wanted to find out how feelings of inferiority affected the ability to solve problems. He gave his students a set of routine tests, but then he solemnly announced that the average person could complete the test in about 1/5 of the time it would really take. When in the course the test, the bell would ring, indicating that the average man's time was up, some of the brightest subjects became very jittery and incompetent indeed, making themselves to be morons. Stop measuring yourself against their standards. You are not them and can never measure up. Neither can they measure up to yours, nor should they. Once you see this simple, rather self-evident truth, accept it, believe it, and your inferior feelings will vanish. Dr. Norton L. Williams, psychiatrist, addressing a medical convention, said recently in a modern man's anxiety and insecurity stem from a lack of self-realization, and that inner security can only be found in a finding oneself, an individuality, uniqueness, and distinctiveness that is akin to the idea of being created in the image of God. He also said that self-realization is gained by a simple belief in one's own uniqueness as a human being, a sense of deep and wide awareness of all people and all things, and a feeling of constructive influencing of others through one's own personality. 100%, yeah. When you are using your personality as a positive, in a positive way, in a positive expression, to positively influence others, that's how you're going to feel fulfillment. You're not going to feel it through just like I said, that using like manipulation tactics to one up somebody all the time. If your focus is on that all the time, you are never going to be somebody that builds authentic connections with people. Somebody that people are going to eventually, they're going to see through that. You're going to ruin your reputation, and karma is real. You know, you're going to create a circumstance and situation where eventually all those people that you have stepped on in order to get ahead, it all comes out in the wash, and it's not a path to fulfillment. You will never be happy doing that, or never have a sense of happiness, a sense of peace in your life. How to use relaxation to dehypnotize yourself. Physical relaxation plays a key role in the dehypnotization process. Our currently held beliefs, whether good or bad, true or false, were formed without effort, with no sense of strain, and without the exercise of willpower. Our habits, whether good or bad, were formed in the same way. It follows that we must employ the same process in forming new beliefs or new habits, that is, in a relaxed condition. It has been aptly demonstrated that attempting to use this effort or will to change beliefs or to cure bad habits has an adverse rather than beneficial effect. Emile Coué, there he is, Emile, with the little French pharmacist who astonished the world around 1920 with the results obtained with the power of suggestion. This is robotic affirming autosuggestion, insisted that effort was the one big reason most people failed to utilize their inner powers. Your suggestions, ideal goals, must be made without effort if they are to be effective, he said. Another famous Coué saying was his law of reversed effort. I spoke about this in another recent video. Here he is, right here. When the will and imagination are in conflict, the imagination invariably wins the day. I mentioned that earlier. I don't remember if it was this chapter or a previous one. And you find that that is the case. That's what we talked about earlier. In the example of being hypnotized to not being lifted to arm, or in various circumstances in your life. You want something, but we don't get what we want. We get what we believe, or we get what we imagine, right? By focused attention. That's why it's so important to practice the focus of your attention, to discipline your mind, to discipline your attention on the outcomes, on the circumstances, on the version of yourself that is able to get those outcomes and sustain them. The late Dr. Knight Dunlop made a lifelong study of habits and learning processes, and perhaps performed more experiments along this line than any other psychologist. His method succeeded in curing such habits as nail biting, thumb sucking, facial tics, and more serious habits where other methods had failed. The very heart of his system was his finding that effort was the one big detriment to either breaking a bad habit or learning a new one. Making an effort to refrain from the habit actually reinforced the habit, he found. Yeah, his experiments proved that the best way to break a habit is to form a clear mental image of the desired end result, and to practice without effort toward reaching that goal. See, this is so well said here, and I have these, again, like I said, these are marked up here for a reason, because some of the things that Neville and these other teachers talk about that seem kind of ephemeral and obscure and nebulous are written here in a very clear, coherent way that's made easier to understand, because he's using language that isn't tied in with all these kinds of very spiritual and esoteric ways of speaking. He's speaking in a very plainly at the heart of what's going on here. that making an effort to refrain from the habit actually reinforces the habit. And that's what Neville means when he says no effort, or when he says do not lift a finger. To practice without effort towards reaching that goal. Dunlop found that either positive practice, refraining from the habit, or negative practice, performing the habit consciously and voluntarily, would have beneficial effect provided the desired end result was kept constantly in mind. There it is again, training the attention. If a response habit is to be learned, or if a response pattern is to be made habitual, he said, it is essential that the learner shall have an idea of the response that is to be achieved, or shall have an idea of the change in the environment that the response will produce. Yeah, again, that's keeping that mental rehearsal, that mental picturing in your mind of the outcome that you're looking to have. The important factor in learning, in short, is the thought of an objective to be attained, either as specific behavior pattern or as the result of the behavior, together with the desire for the attainment of the object. In many cases, the mere relaxation of effort or too much conscious straining is in itself enough to eradicate the negative behavior pattern. Interesting. Saying that purely the relaxation of the effort or too much conscious straining is in itself enough to eradicate, to get rid of that pattern. That's interesting. Dr. James S. Green, founder of the National Hospital for Speech Disorders, New York City, had a model. When they can relax, they can talk. Pointed out that often the effort or willpower used to fight against or resist worry is the very thing that perpetuates worry and keeps it going. That's what I speak about too, is that like a lot of the times it's that beating yourself up about it. It's that meta awareness that's compounding the problem. So even if you have this goal, it's important that around the goal, you actually are excited about it. You actually are believing it. You're enthusiastic about it. You're not just, I have this goal, I'm imagining this goal, but now I got to try hard, or now it's like this daunting task, this daunting goal that I have, because you're creating what is being spoken about here that is getting in the way of it. Physical relaxation, when practiced daily, brings about, and this is the feeling of naturalness as well, this feeling of relaxation, this feeling of neutrality that I talk about all the time. The needy attachments over here, the fearful avoidance over here, and in the middle we have this natural feeling. We have what Maxwell Maltz is talking about here, the relaxed state, being in a state of relaxation. Physical relaxation, when practiced daily, brings about an accompanying mental relaxation. That's what is required. A relaxed attitude which enables us to better consciously control our automatic mechanism. Physical relaxation also, in itself, has a powerful influence in dehypnotizing us from negative attitudes and reaction patterns. This is interesting too, because I wrote these footnotes here saying that this is the determination to have from transurfing. And I must have equated it when I originally was reading this to, that feeling of naturalness, that determination to have is that relaxed feeling about it. Because when we're determined to have something, or when we've decided, we've made the decision, I'm going to have this, it doesn't usually have that really needy energy or that really fearful energy. It's just that calm energy. The calm energy, the feeling of naturalness, when it's natural for you to have something, is calm. You're not thinking so much about it. You're not thinking so much about going to get a glass of water, or going to the bathroom, or going to grab a coffee. You are not overly excited, neither are you scared that you're not going to be able to get it. It's just natural. It just simply is. Okay, so here we go with the practice exercise at the end of this chapter here. I'm actually going to cover that in a separate video, because this video has gone on for a pretty good amount of time, and I think by doing this separately it'll be valuable, because then that way we can just cover it separately, kind of do a guided process through it. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video for this exercise, and then as well for chapter 5 we're going to get into how to utilize the power of rational thinking. So thank you guys for watching. Again, drop this with a like, hit me with a subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.